The first and probably the biggest myth in going on an African safari that holds people back from even thinking about going on an African safari is the cost. You may think it's too expensive to go on an African safari. I've heard that it costs lots and lots of money. And you may have seen in a video I've done before that an average African safari costs about $3,000. And that's true. The thing about these days is that with this season that we're in, the costs have actually gone down. And so the same safari that would have cost about $3,000 is now generally a bit cheaper than that. But over and above that, you could actually lower your cost on an African safari way lower by doing something that we do, something that I personally do when going on a safari. Now you'll notice in any of the vlogs I've done in the past when going on an African safari, I don't actually use a tour guide or use a tour van or go with a safari company. That's because I do my own DIY safari, that I go on a safari myself. I use my vehicle and I drive myself and my family to that African safari. And the thing about that is that it lowers your costs dramatically if you do that. Now, recently, we went to a national park just a few hours from where I live. That park is called the Olpajeta Conservancy. It's in a place called Nanyuki. Now, we did our own DIY safari. We went, took the vehicle, just packed a few things, went and looked for a hotel that is nice in the nearby town called Nanyuki, and we used that hotel as our base. And we stayed there for a couple of nights, but within that time, we went on a self-drive safari into the national park. Now that saved us money, because if we would have gone with the safari company, they probably would have accommodated us within the national park, and the hotels are way more expensive than when you do like what we did. And so our costs were basically really low. Our costs were extremely low for that safari, and you can do something similar to this to what we did. Now, obviously, there are a few caveats to that kind of advice, because first, if you're going to do a self-drive safari here in Kenya or in Africa, you need to know how to navigate our roads. We drive on the left side of the road and so on. And so there are some things that are sort of caveats if you're going to do that. The thing about it is, even if you do not do your own DIY safari, if you do the cookie cutter safari, you may be thinking that it costs a lot of money, but it actually does not. Go and check out the safaris in the description below, and you will see there's a very wide range of different safaris that are actually really awesome, some of which go as low as $1,500 or even $1,000 for a couple of days of safari. And so do not be held back by the cost. The other big thing that holds people back from going on African safaris is the fear that they're going to go on a cookie cutter safari organized by a safari company, and that they're going to go into tourist traps where everyone else goes, and so it's not going to be as fun because you're looking for that authentic African experience. Now, to that, I would answer in three different things. First is that even when it's going to be a cookie cutter safari, it's going to be something so different from what you're used to, especially if you've lived in the West all your life. By the West, I mean like Europe, the US, and so on. If you've lived in those places all your life, just coming to Africa, even on a safari organized by a company, is going to be something really interesting and different from what you've ever experienced in your life. And so it's not going to be cookie cutter in any sense of the imagination. And even when you're going to be going to safari destinations like the Masai Mara that have been visited very often by many tourists, it's still an adventure because it's not one particular path that you have to take when going on safari. Now, some of these parks that are huge, like Tsavo, the Masai Mara, and even smaller ones, like the one I went to, the Olpajeta, they have trails that are interconnected like a web, and you could literally be taking different routes every time you come to that safari destination, and every day you're going to be going on that safari over and over again. And it's also an adventure because you're going to look for animals that are not staying in one place. And so you may have seen a lion here today, you may go to a different place and find elephants, and go to a different place and find giraffes and so on. And so it's going to be an adventure even when it's a cookie cutter safari. The other thing that may be holding you back from going on your African safari is the fear that you have to go in the best time of the year for you to have the best safari. The best time to come on an African safari, especially here in East Africa, is between around end of June into July and August. And the reason for that is because that's a dry period, and so animals are gathered round like watering holes, and the grass is short, and so you're able to spot animals from far. And that's the main reason why you'd want to go on safari during the dry season. However, you may be wondering, can I go on safari in November or in April when it's really rainy? Now, I did, as I mentioned before, recently, just a few days ago, we went on a safari during the wet season. And while doing this, it was actually pretty rainy. The thing about some of these national parks, many of these national parks, is that they are well maintained. Now, the other fear about not being able to see animals during that time is valid, because you do not want to come in a time when spotting animals is going to be difficult, when the grass is very tall and they're not really very keen on coming to watering holes. That's a valid fear. However, if you use a good tour company, especially if you're going to be using a safari company, use a good tour company that has a good tour guide. You're going to have a tour guide who is going to be well connected with other tour guides, and so they are going to be able to spot animals for you, and you're going to be able to find animals not as easily as you would during the dry season, but it would be an epic adventure. You are going to find animals. Now, most of the grazers, most of the herbivores, the buffalo, the giraffes, the antelopes, and so on, are going to be in very large numbers. The wildebeest, they're going to be in very large numbers. Animals like the leopards, lions, and so on are a bit more tricky to find during the wet season. However, you still may lack out and find some of those animals still, because they've not gone out of the national park. It's just that they're a bit more difficult to find. The other thing that may be holding you back on going on your African safari is the fear that you can't go on a safari with kids. You may have young kids and you're afraid of what kind of safari is it going to be with these very young kids. Now, I personally bust this myth by I went with my toddler on a safari, and it was difficult. We needed to plan, we needed to think about what they would eat, we needed to think about how exactly we would travel. And the benefit on my side is that I was doing a DIY safari where I went with my own vehicle, and so I was in more control over the kind of environment that we would be in. Now, if you're going to be traveling with kids in a safari company, you first need to check whether kids are allowed on that safari, because sometimes they are not. And the best thing for you to do is go on a private safari that is just your family that is going to be on that safari, that is not going to be shared. And that would allow you to have a lot more control on your safari. One of the big things that may be holding you back on going on your African safari is that you don't know what the accommodation is going to be like. This video here talks about exactly that. I went to a 5-star hotel, then the next night went to a 3-star hotel, and I document exactly what I experienced. So watch it next.